Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris,
And my name is James.
and we're the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
Yeah, well, it's good to be back. For those who have kind of been waiting for content and wondering, we've taken a little break over the week, but we promise we have much more coming. So thank you for joining us on the episode and for joining us for a review of a fantastic race in Imola.
Yeah, it was a good race, and it was a really good race weekend overall. We had a lot of like weather variable stuff. Weather definitely was thrown into the mix. And that made for a very interesting weekend, a very interesting race today. Also, it was the first sprint race weekend of the year as well, which that also made for a very interesting weekend as well. So overall, it was a pretty good weekend. The race was pretty good, but I think the weekend overall was a very good weekend.
Yeah. So we can start right away. I think definitely only because for those of you that are not familiar with the sprint race weekend and the format, we have one practice session on Friday before our traditional qualifying session is moved from Saturday to where FP2 would be on Friday. And then Saturday, we have FP2 and the sprint race. And the qualifying, even though technically in the qualifying session, the person who sets the fastest time is gifted pole position. The sprint race on Saturday determines the starting grid for the actual Grand Prix on Sunday. So qualifying was already a mixed bag, and I think saw a lot of different teams out of position just because they only had one testing session. I think Ferrari, that is something that Ferrari didn't really capitalize on.
Yeah.
Especially at the hands of Carlos Sainz, which we'll talk about him in a minute. And it provided for, because of that, the sprint race was fantastic.
Yeah, and the qualifying also threw a big wrench in qualifying. We saw a bunch of red flags because of rain. It was it's funny now. Every single time they call for rain in the forecast, I think we all get a little bit of PTSD from Spa last year.
Yes.
Sitting in front of the TV for 2 hours, just watching nothing happen because it kept getting delayed and all that mess. So, but it was very good. Having that definitely made things interesting for the sprint race. And we saw, because of that, we, like you mentioned, we saw a lot of people, a lot of drivers that were kind of like out of position at the start of the sprint race, and quite a few drivers had some really impressive drives during the sprint race. So
speaking of, I want to just chat real quick. Carlos Sainz coming into the weekend extended his Ferrari contract for another 2 years.
Yeah, which is really, really good. I think it's absolutely the right move for Ferrari. I think right now they don't really have a whole lot of to look at in the way of who all is coming up through the Ferrari Driver Academy. Right now the closest is Mick, and I believe, I'm not sure on the status of Mick's contract, but I think Ferrari definitely wants to give him a little bit more time in that car to see what he can do in an actually competitive car. And so I think signing Carlos was absolutely the right move, but after having him signed, had a rough weekend.
Well, I just want to chat real quick about that driver situation for Ferrari. Because Antonio Giovinazzi is now their reserve driver. So Robert Schwartzman is no longer the reserve and test driver. I believe he still does some simulator work. He's still in the academy, but he's been out of racing for so long that I realistically think that his shot at getting into the team is not, it's not going to happen. It's just, at this point, it's not going to happen. He's going to have to get into an Alfa Romeo or a Haas, but they have their drivers, and there are many more drivers in waiting. And the only other is Mick. And I think he's going to be a good candidate to replace Carlos Sainz when his time at Ferrari eventually ends, whether it's 2024 or whenever it is. But I think Ferrari needs a little bit more time to evaluate Mick, and especially now that he has a comparable teammate, to see how he compares to Kevin Magnussen. I think he's getting closer because he finished P11 today and had a respectable day. And in the sprint race had a great battle with Sebastian Vettel, but I think they just need more time to evaluate everything. And Carlos, realistically, right now, is their only shot. Not to say that he doesn't deserve the seat, because he absolutely does. And then, but unfortunately, he had the weekend that he had.
Yes, he did have the weekend that he had. Yeah, that was really tough to see.
Which was unfortunate because his sprint race was
oh my gosh, it was so good. He started 10th place and ended up fourth.
Yep.
Like gained 6 positions, and it was like just watching him just overtake and overtake and overtake. I was like, holy moly.
And I was like, I didn't get a chance to watch the sprint race because I was busy. And I just remember you getting text updates from like, Carlos is in P8, Carlos is in P6, Carlos is in P5. And I was just like, there's no way. But then I went back and watched the sprint race. I watched some of his onboards, and it was just a great piece of driving all around from Carlos. But yeah, so let's just get right into the race with our biggest takeaways. And mine is kind of going off of the theme of what we have just been talking about. You know, it's unfortunate that Carlos Sainz's race ended the way that it did. It's definitely 100% just rotten luck. He was a passenger at that point, you know, getting tagged by Daniel Ricardo during and at the Tamburello chicane, and you know, he was a passenger. So my takeaway is just that his unfortunate luck continues, and we've seen this from Carlos Sainz. The beginning of seasons for him are always just filled with bad luck, and there are some things that he probably could do better on, but today was just pure rotten luck.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's really Daniel Ricciardo's fault either, because Daniel Ricciardo was the one that hit him. I wouldn't say it was really Daniel's fault either, because, you know, in the wet, you know, both drivers left each other plenty of room, and Daniel just hit the curb and his car just slid into Carlos's. And it wasn't really something that he could have like anticipated. You know, it was purely just a racing incident, and it's really unfortunate.
And going back and looking at Daniel's onboard, the amount of curb that he took would have been perfectly fine at any other track. It just so happens that the curbs are the way that they are at Imola, and they have a lot of bite. And it just got unlucky, and you know, I don't necessarily know he judged it right. The curbs were still really, really wet, and just lost a little bit of control there on the inside. It was a good move. It was a legit move. It was definitely on. Carlos left him plenty space, and I think they were both passengers, and the FIA made the right call of not investigating that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think for Ferrari, it was kind of a weekend to forget. Charles didn't necessarily run a bad race, but considering how well he did in the sprint race, overtaking Max at the start, and purely just got overtaken because his tires had gone out. But he couldn't keep up with Max. He got overtaken by Checo, and in pushing too hard, ended up spinning, dropping down to 6th, and finished the race in 6th. So, and that's really not what you want to see from a team that's leading both championships.
Yeah. And
you really don't want to see that.
From the two championship protagonists right now being Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen, the only times Max Verstappen is not finished has been because of mechanical problems. When he's finished races, he is 100% on races that he's finished. He's won. And I think this is a little bit symptomatic of a problem that Ferrari has, which I'll get into later. I don't want to talk about that right now, but Charles made the first mistake in what so far has been, from the two of them, a flawless campaign. Notwithstanding the DNFs because of Red Bull's power unit. I'm talking specifically their driving. It was the first mistake that either of them had made, and it was costly.
Yep. Yeah, it really was.
on the flip side, one of my other big takeaways from the weekend is this is exactly the race that Red Bull needed. 100%
Oh,
the race that Red Bull needed.
oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. It was looking like coming out of the last weekend in Australia, it was really looking like, yikes, is this getting out of Red Bull's hands? And they
Mhm.
proved this weekend that nope, it's not.
Yep.
Just had some bad luck early on, but it was definitely, and as a team, it builds your confidence. As drivers, Max and Checo definitely builds your confidence. And so this was 100% a weekend that Red Bull needed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And again, I think that is a little bit symptomatic of a problem that Ferrari has and has had for a long time, but I'll get into that later.
Yeah.
My next, what are some of your takeaways from the weekend?
I was also, first off, I have no idea what's going on at Mercedes. That's been like the big, other than Ferrari is all of a sudden now really good. Mercedes is all of a sudden now nowhere. But
With the exception of George
my,
Russell, though.
yeah, well, yeah, it's funny because George and Lewis are in the same equipment. And today, George Russell finished fifth, fourth or fifth
He
place,
ended up fourth
fourth after Charles. Yep.
after Charles's crash
So George finished fourth place, but Lewis finished 13th.
and lapped by Max Verstappen.
Yeah, and was lapped by Max Verstappen and Checo. And it was like, it's baffling. I don't really have any words. It's just truly baffling. And
yeah,
I'm going to talk a lot about that more later in one of our other segments, but it's really, my takeaway from that is I'm extremely impressed by George Russell.
yes,
Extremely impressed. I have no idea what's going on at
100%.
Mercedes, but I am so incredibly impressed by George Russell. He has been
Yep.
so great all season, and he's proven that maybe he's not driver number 2.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
he's not the driver number 2 that Valtteri Bottas was for Lewis.
yeah. A couple things on George. He is the only driver to have not finished below fifth this entire season. He and I think Mercedes is after the comparison between George and Lewis today. I think Mercedes is never going to do this because Lewis Hamilton is their golden child, is the face of the brand, is the face of Formula One. So they're never going to do it. But I think Ferrari or Mercedes really need to have a legitimate conversation, not necessarily about who's officially the number one driver, because it will always be Lewis. But
Yeah.
George is what, P3 in the championship right now?
Yes.
He's about to get overtaken by Max Verstappen, I think.
It's close. I can bring it up.
He's
Pull it up
P3 or P4 in the championship.
He's P4.
He's P4. Okay, so
Yep.
it's Charles, Carlos, Max, George, right?
No, it's Charles Verstappen, Checo, Russell. Carlos
Okay.
was dropped down to 5th behind Russell after today's
right.
DNF.
Okay. So I think if George legitimately makes a case for P4, P5 in the championship right now, I think Mercedes are going to have to make the difficult decisions later on down the road if Hamilton can kind of get his Mercedes under him about which driver to prioritize.
Yeah.
I think the way that Lewis Hamilton has always been prioritized with Valtteri Bottas, I think they're really going to have to make that call. And someone said, I saw on Twitter that somebody made the comparison between Lewis Hamilton in 2022 and Sebastian Vettel in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Now it's still very early days in the championship, but we're 4 races down. We're about to head into the summer season and the European season after Miami. Which that's really where we're going to, we're starting to get into the meat of the season, and the excuse of it's still early days is running out of time to use.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah. My other takeaway that I have is along this similar vein, but wow, what a drive from Lando Norris.
Yeah.
Getting a podium in a car at the very beginning, everyone was like, "Ugh, yikes, this is going to be a long season for McLaren." But Lando getting the podium.
Yeah.
What a drive from him. What a drive from him today. And he did capitalize on a bit of bad luck on the part of Charles Leclerc, but hey, that's the business. Capitalize where you can on, and sometimes it's capitalizing on the misfortune of others. And he was in a position where he absolutely could jump Charles and get onto the podium. So what an incredible drive from Lando.
Yeah, I always say that, and every time there's a little bit of criticism drawn to shock winners like Pierre Gasly or Esteban Ocon are the two that I can think of right off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, they got lucky. It's like, yeah, they got lucky, but you have to put yourself in a position to be able to capitalize on luck. I mean, compared to where Daniel Ricciardo was running, I mean, even had the collision with Carlos not happen, he was probably P5, P6, P7. And I don't know if Lando Norris was running. I don't know. Lando had the better of Daniel Ricciardo, and he put himself in a place compared to his teammate. He put himself in a place where he could capitalize on that, and he did. And he drove a great race. He put himself where he needed to be, and you can't deny that that's a good podium. And I think for McLaren too, that's a welcome sign for them. I think Daniel Ricciardo had a little bit of bad luck, so it's unfortunate that he finished where they finished. But given their collective performance in qualifying and the sprint race, and then last time out in Australia, I think McLaren have something going now.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And last little quick thing, it was great to see Valtteri Bottas finishing the points again. Finished 8th place. So he's also at a at a new team this year. He's really been impressive and was impressive this weekend.
There was a lot of airtime that he got in the battles that he had with like Russell and K-Mag and everything. He got a lot of airtime, and I think he's still not quite confident in that car yet. And the reason why I say that is because there are a lot of times where he was in the DRS zone once it was open. Once the DRS was turned on and he had the DRS open, there were a lot of times where he was gaining and could have made a late lunge into the corner, but just didn't quite, I think was a little hesitant under braking and putting his car in a position to go for an overtake. So I think he's still gaining confidence in that car, and he's already that fast. I think we still have the best from Valtteri Bottas yet to come this season.
Yep, I would agree.
My other biggest takeaways are Yuki Tsunoda drove a fantastic race. Ended up P7. Would have been P6 had he not been passed by Charles, but ended up P7 and had the upper hand on Pierre Gasly almost all weekend and had a brilliant drive. Very, very mature, very far removed from the Yuki Tsunoda we saw last year.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely maturing as a driver, as a person, and he had a great race today. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yep. All right. So those are our biggest takeaways from the weekend. So
we can now go on to our next segment of the Formula One Bros official weekly top 10. Again, for this segment, it's not just drivers, not just teams. Anything goes. There are no rules. So we'll go ahead and get this jump started. Even though we kind of talked a little bit about, or talked a lot about this driver already, but in 10th place, even though he had tons of bad luck, we're going to put Carlos Sainz in 10th place this weekend because up until he was taken out of the race, which it wasn't his fault. First off, it wasn't his fault. He was just a passenger there. But I mean, look at the sprint race that he had. He went from 10th all the way. I mean, we mentioned it before, but he went from 10th all the way up to 4th place to finish in the sprint race. So for the weekend, I think Carlos Sainz, despite his bad luck in qualifying and in the race, I think we can still safely put him in top 10 in 10th place because of how well he did in the sprint race.
Yeah, it's tough to put him any higher though, because he ended up in P10 in qualifying because he crashed. So that was a mistake that was done by him. Again, I think that's partly due just to, I don't think Ferrari quite got their setup right this weekend. And again, I'm going to talk about Ferrari later, so I don't want to harp on it, but that was a mistake that probably shouldn't have happened. So I'm also going to say tied for P10 needs to be Yuki Tsunoda. We need to mention him in this conversation because he had a great race. He drove a very mature race for such a young driver. And I can tell you, if there's anybody out there that hates Yuki Tsunoda, I have many questions for you. He's very popular in the paddock. He has an amazing sense of humor. He's awesome. And I think he garnered a little bit of criticism that he didn't take Formula One serious enough last year. And I think we've seen him mature a lot. I'm not going to comment on that because I think it's not up to us to speak on the behalf of drivers when it comes to their maturity and how they're handling the sport. But we've seen so much improvement from him already this season, and he was very impressive today.
Yep, I would agree. So yeah, honorable mention for Yuki Tsunoda, but in 10th place, we're having Carlos Sainz. In 9th place, we have Mr. Lance Stroll.
Yeah, I initially thought of him because he ended up in the points. He ended up P10, which compared to his teammate, I think, again, the reason why I don't have him higher is because compared to Sebastian Vettel, and granted, Seb is a 4-time world champion, but this was only his 2nd race of the season. This is Lance's 4th. I think he could have been a little bit higher, fighting for a little bit. But it's really good to see him in the points. It's good to see Aston Martin and getting their first double points finish of the season. So yeah, I think all in all, a great drive from him. He had a quiet weekend. I think a lot of the attention was surrounding Sebastian Vettel and how he performed this weekend, and we'll get on to him. He's a little bit higher up on our list. But yeah, I just wanted to throw Lance Stroll in there. I think he gave a mature race.
Yeah, and he helped Aston Martin get their first double points of the season. So good on Lance. In 8th place, we have the sprint race. So I personally have on the podcast have made my personal opinions about the sprint races very clear. I'm not the biggest fan of them. I think they're a little gimmicky, all that kind of stuff, but it was very entertaining. It was very entertaining.
It was, especially at a track like Imola. Like I was worried that it was just going to turn into a procession. And I think I mentioned that on our last episode that I thought it was going to happen. And there were some decent overtakes that, the DRS was powerful, but not too powerful, I think, at that circuit. And initially I was very apprehensive that there was going to be a sprint race at Imola. But I was pleasantly surprised with how it went going back and watching the race, I think, and all of the highlights. I was pleasantly surprised. And I think in general, my opinions on it have always been incredibly neutral. Like, I totally understand the benefits of having it. You get more entertainment throughout the weekend because you have a quali on Friday, you have a race on Saturday, and a race on Sunday. But I also understand the drawbacks, and I consider myself, when it comes to the weekend format, maybe a little bit of a traditionalist. But I understand the plus from both sides. The drivers don't seem to mind it. I think it throws a new challenge at them with only having one free practice session before the cars are locked into the Parc Fermé. But I think this one was good. If the sprint race at Imola was this good, then I'm looking forward to our sprint races in Austria and Brazil, because those are great tracks, much better for overtaking, especially Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
I'm very much looking forward to our other two sprint races of the season.
Yeah. Yeah. In 7th place, the Viking comeback man himself, Kevin Magnussen, put in a great weekend, finishing 9th in the race, bringing home some nice points for Haas. But yeah, he drove a great race, had a great weekend. So yeah, Kevin Magnussen coming home 9th in our weekly top 10 in 7th place.
Yeah, I think, again, I would have put him much higher had he, because compared to where he started,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't have a great race. But I don't think that's necessarily him. I think Haas started the season incredibly strong, and I don't think that they're getting worse. But I think other teams are starting to get better. I think like McLaren are starting to get better. I think Alpine are starting to get better, despite Fernando Alonso's retirement today. I think, there are just other teams that are making progress. So I think Haas are starting to kind of settle in more where that car should be.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't deny that Kevin Magnussen putting it, what was it, P4 or P5 after the sprint race?
Yeah.
He did a great job. I would have liked to have seen him finish up in P5, but
Mm-hmm.
compared to the drivers that he had behind him, I think he did what he could. That Haas was never going to stay in that position, and you could tell right from the start that he was falling back into the clutches of Lando Norris, of George Russell. So he was falling back of Valtteri Bottas. He was falling backwards a little bit, but you know it's still so good to see him back in the sport, and he does it again with some good needed points for Haas.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Going on in 6th place. Now, as we said, with there being no rules and anything goes, in 6th place, the weather.
Yeah,
The weather in 6th place, it definitely threw a wrench in a lot of different things. With it raining during first practice and not getting like a lot of drivers not getting the amount of testing that they need, and then it being no rain in qualifying, the sprint race, with it raining a lot in qualifying before the sprint race. And, that put a lot of drivers out of position where they typically
start
were for the sprint
yeah,
race.
and
Um,
drivers having to start the race on inters.
yeah. And then, having to start the race on intermediate tires. And, the track was very slow to dry. So yeah, the weather made for a very, very interesting weekend.
Yeah.
Definitely mixed a lot of things up. For
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Yeah, there's this great saying, and I can't remember who coined it first, but there's this great quote in Formula One that rain is the great equalizer. Like, you can be the best over a single lap when the conditions are perfect and your car is right where, and the setup that makes it happiest, right on the knife edge. But you throw a little rain into that, especially after parc fermé conditions, and you can't change your setup. Um, yeah, it is the great equalizer, and also it brings so much more into the sport than just the driver. Because the strategists and the team personnel involved in calling shots for the team have to make the right call when it comes to when are we going to put on the rain tires. The track is drying, when are we going to put on the slick tires? And it's not a universal thing, because some tracks like Imola dry much slower than others. If it
Mhm.
like in Malaysia, that track dries so fast because it's so hot there. But in a place like Imola, where it's much more temperate, the track surface it's older. It holds on to water a little bit more. It's a very flat track, so it holds on to water a lot. So it's not always going to be a universal, after it stops raining, certain number of laps go by and then we'll put them on slicks. So it brings in a lot of personnel making decisions onto the
Yep.
team, and they all have these very high-powered weather radars that they're looking at to make predictions and everything. But the weather is not predictable. So it's always the great equalizer. It brings in a lot more, and the best drivers in the rain come out on top. And today that was Red Bull.
Yep, absolutely. Moving on to fifth place, which the person we have in fifth place for our weekend is conveniently his finishing place, Valtteri Bottas, in fifth place. Yeah, we have him in fifth place. He finished fifth place. He had a great weekend.
Yeah.
He finished the sprint race in eighth. I'm not sure where I can't remember where he started the sprint race, but he finished in eighth place and then made up a couple more places during the race. Partially due to, some misfortune of, Charles Leclerc, but, even if Charles Leclerc hadn't made a mistake, he still would have been sixth. So pretty impressive all around, especially considering how horrible of a winter testing that team had.
Yeah. I think he's really starting to establish himself as Mr. Consistency in that team, which is what that team needs. And it hasn't had. Kimi Räikkönen in the past was good when he was on it, but he showed his age more than drivers like Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel have. He was showing his age, and Antonio Giovinazzi was always a little bit more inconsistent. So the consistency that Valtteri Bottas has brought to that team is something that is desperately needed. I'm incredibly happy to see, and he deserves a lot of praise for it. I think he's still getting, like I said earlier, comfortable with his car, but I think when he does, it's going to be even better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So he had an incredible weekend, and I think fifth place is very, very deserving. And moving on in fourth place, and it is so nice to finally be able to talk about this person in positive light, Sebastian Vettel, fourth place. He finished the race in eighth, but the reason why we have him so high is because he, after coming off of missing 2 races for COVID, last weekend was not a great weekend, still very much, finding his footing with the car. Just had no idea what was going on with the car. But this week, finishing in the points, finished 8th place, had a really, really great race. So yeah, Sebastian Vettel, 4th place.
I saw this crazy stat, and I can't remember where I saw it, but Sebastian Vettel, over the course of the Australian Grand Prix weekend, completed 45 laps in 3 practice sessions, qualifying, and the race, which is not even a Grand Prix distance.
Yeah.
And for him to do that and come here and be incredibly quick in a car that has looked like miserable to drive, just came in, did everything that he needed to do. And I hope and I pray that this is a sign of Sebastian Vettel's form for the season. Because if he's doing what he did in that Aston Martin today on his second race of the season, I can't wait to see what he's going to be doing on, his 20th race of the season, when we, Enzo, when we finally get into it. So I think, he deserves every bit of praise. He did an amazing job this weekend. And I know some people are probably going to be like, why do you have someone who finished in 8th place and 4th place? But it's because he did so well. And it's because he came back after, not even doing a Grand Prix distance 2 weeks ago and missing 2 races because of COVID, and gave a really strong performance, a solid, reliable performance.
Yep, absolutely. Moving on to third place, our first position of our podium. In third place, we have Mr. George Russell.
Yeah. I mean,
what a great weekend for him.
Despite our George Russell bias on this podcast, he deserves every bit of praise, because especially considering when your teammate is a 7-time world champion
and finishing 13th.
Right. It'd be like in 2006 if Felipe Massa did that to Michael Schumacher. Like that kind of thing is what I compare that to. And it's never happened before. And I think George Russell has a much, much better handle on that Mercedes than Lewis Hamilton does at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
he
I have
is
I have a theory
incredibly
on why that
impressive.
might be. I have a theory on why that might be, because George Russell spent the last 3 years at Williams. His first season, especially, the car was horrible. 2020, they made improvements, still bad car. 2021, again, made improvements, still not the best car. But he very regularly put that car in places where it was never supposed to be. And so I think he's just gotten really, really used to driving terrible cars. And now that Mercedes has built a terrible car, he knows exactly what to do. He knows
Yeah.
exactly how he needs to drive it. He knows what he needs to do. So granted, I think there's some other factors in Lewis's confidence, which I'll talk about later, as to why he was finishing down in 13th. Because I think where George Russell is where George Russell finished is pretty accurate as to where that team should be. But yeah, a great I think great weekend for George, and I think that plays into why he is being so successful at Mercedes when they built a bad car.
Yeah, I think too. And for I think it's hard to deny that Mercedes is a bad car. And just to kind of put some context onto that, Lewis Hamilton in an interview this weekend said that driving the W13 was like driving his 2009 McLaren, which
Mm-hmm.
is a scathing indictment of the car that he has.
Yeah.
And if I was Mercedes personnel, I would be like not offended, but just like a little bit dejected.
I would be offended.
But I think too, um, I think that is a little bit more telling of kind of where Lewis Hamilton is at mentally.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're both going to kind of get into that in a little bit.
Yes.
But yeah, George Russell deserves every bit of praise.
Absolutely.
Again, put himself in a position compared to where his teammate finished, put himself in a position to be fourth at the end of that race.
Yeah. All righty. Moving on. In second place, we have Lando Norris. Lando Norris. What a race for him. Finishing on the podium. Overall, just had a great weekend. Great job, Lando.
Yeah, he is such a fun person that it is so exciting to see him on the podium again. He deserves it. He's incredibly talented. And I think, too, that is probably where that McLaren is.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if this is McLaren starting to turn a corner.
Yeah.
I think I do. I mean, yes, Daniel Ricciardo finished where he finished, which was like 17, 18.
I think it was 18th.
I think that was simply because of his contact with Carlos Sainz. I don't think that because that compromised his race dramatically. I don't think that is an indictment of where that car is. I think, I think that that Lando's performance is a little bit indicative of the upturn in form that McLaren is starting to go on. And I hope it continues because McLaren is a great team, a very historic team, and they deserve to be fighting for wins. And it's always going to be more exciting when that happens.
Yeah.
But also, Lando is incredibly talented and 100% deserved that podium.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And in first place, winning our weekly top 10 is Red Bull Racing.
Yeah. I mean,
what a great weekend that they've had.
Yeah. Coming off of all of the bad luck that they've had, I think this was a statement of where that car is, where that car can be. And I think I hope that is a result of that car getting better and getting closer to where it should be. as in terms of reliability, and it was Max Verstappen's second career Grand Slam. And Sergio Perez, we have to say, pulled out all of the Mexican Minister of Defense stuff again, and compared to Charles Leclerc, gave an incredible performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they took maximum points from the race today, with Max putting in the fastest lap, winning the race, Checo coming in second. It really was truly a great weekend for Red Bull, and this is the weekend that they needed. Absolutely, the weekend that they needed. Wow. Yeah. I'm heartbroken that it wasn't Ferrari, but it was so good to see them capitalizing and kind of turning a corner on some of the misfortune that they've had. I still think that they may have quite a ways to go. I don't know how well that they've figured out their reliability issues with the fuel. I know Christian Horner mentioned something that they think they figured it out. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, what a great weekend from Red Bull. We had to put them first. They deserve it. Absolutely deserve it. Yeah. So hold on, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties here. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. Now I can hear. So your sound cut out for a minute.
What I was going to say is they've put themselves back in the championship hunt. They have. And, they're back up in P2 in constructors. Max Verstappen and Checo Perez are where they should be in championship points, second and third. So it's on. It's back on, because it was always on.
Yeah.
But maybe it wasn't there for a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's back on for them. I think so we know that they have a fast car.
Mm-hmm.
We know that they can compete for wins. Their sole priority going forward needs to be reliability.
Yeah. Yeah.
And figuring out, and maybe they have. I mean, the past couple of races, we've had 2 weeks off in between, and we're going to have another 2 weeks before Miami, and then another 2 weeks before Spain, before we get into the European season, where we have a couple triple headers and back-to-backs. But, I think they're starting to figure everything out, and that's a very, very good thing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, now with the drive that both of them put this weekend, both Max and Checo, who knows? Maybe we'll have a 3 or 4-way title fight. Who knows? Maybe we'll have a 3 or 4-way title fight like we did in 2012. So all in all, a fantastic weekend for Red Bull Racing.
And I hope we have a 3-way title fight. That would be so much fun to watch.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. I know. All right. We are going to now move on to our next segment, biggest winners and biggest losers of the weekend. We're going to start off talking about the biggest losers first, and then we'll talk about the biggest winners, and then we'll move on. So first off, biggest losers, I'll have to say one of my biggest losers for the weekend is Ferrari.
Yeah, that's definitely the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the problem that I've been talking about, saying that I'm going to chat about now. So the problem that they had and that Charles complained about is graining on the front tires, which was worse than they predicted, and they said was likely because of the cold weather. So I am wondering, and this is a problem that Ferrari had last year and the year before and in 2019, was their problem with tires, especially in cold weather. I think in 2019 and 2020, it was a little bit of an everywhere problem. I think it was a little bit of an everything problem. But especially last year and this year, it's a cold weather problem. And I think that trend has continued. And I think that we saw that today, which is why Charles could not put up a fight against Sergio Perez. He came on the radio at the very end when he pitted for softs, before his wreck, he pitted for softs, and he said, I think we should have put on the mediums.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a little indicative of, they definitely had some tire problems this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, we're going to Miami in 2 weeks, which
it's going to be hot.
It's
already hot
and
here.
humid.
Yeah.
It's going to be hot. It's going to be humid. And then we're going to at the end of May, beginning of June, we start the European summer season. And so I think, with the exception of a maybe cooler climate places, I don't think we'll see, hopefully we don't see that problem anymore, but that's definitely something that is a problem. And I'm really wondering if it is a characteristic of the design philosophy of that car, not a specific car to car, but the way
Mm-hmm.
that they set up their cars just works better in warmer climates and
Mm-hmm.
has a hard time in cooler climates. Because I remember, like, people weren't talking about Ferrari being fastest in Barcelona, and then all
Because
of
it
a
was cold.
sudden, because it was, and then you're right, and then all of a sudden they were in Bahrain when it was hot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely looking like it's a trend. I think it was exacerbated by the wet weather, but that's definitely something that they need to get on top of. So definitely in my biggest loser category this weekend.
Yeah. Another in the biggest loser, another biggest loser that I have is Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, not a good weekend for Lewis. Yeah, I don't even know where to begin.
Well, I know where to begin. He was
Go
lapped
for
by
it.
Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
He was lapped by Max Verstappen, and it was really savage in, like, the 2 laps. I think it was 2 laps before, maybe a lap before Max caught Lewis. They flashed a graphic of the gap between Max and between Lewis, and it was 77 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like Max being like 3 or 4 seconds behind Lewis before lapping him. 77. I thought that was the most savage piece of TV directing I'd ever seen. And what a statement by Max Verstappen, blowing past him on the front stretch to lap him. I think that should be a big statement.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Especially when you consider how ugly the championship got last year, not just between Max and Lewis, but between Red Bull and Mercedes.
Mm-hmm.
I think Red Bull and Max need to take, and Mercedes and Lewis need to take that as a very big statement.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think Lewis has, and it is 100% affected. It is 100% affected his mental attitude towards everything right now. In every interview that he gave this weekend, especially after FP1 in qualifying, like Saturday and Sunday, he looked completely out. He looked like he was moving on to other things. And that makes me wonder if this is going to be his last year in F1. Because right now he's kind of acting like it. Not as a statement of his character, but just like the way that he's talking to the media, it doesn't sound like somebody who wants to be in Formula One right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you covered it all with that. I'm gonna talk more about that situation later. But another biggest loser, and again, it wasn't totally his fault, but Daniel Ricciardo caught out at the beginning, accidentally bumped into Carlos, was dropped back to the back and just couldn't make up ground. Unfortunate weekend for Daniel, especially considering up until his run-in with Carlos at Temporello chicane, was having a pretty strong weekend. McLaren as a whole was having a pretty strong weekend considering where they started the season.
Yeah.
And it was just really unfortunate what happened to Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and in the biggest loser category, I'm going to throw in Alpine.
Mm-hmm.
Come away with no points. Fernando Alonso had his retirement. That's really unfortunate because I think Alpine can compete for 4th in the constructors. Yeah. I think they have it in them. Especially, I think all in all, on average pace, they're faster than Mercedes right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so they need to be coming out with a team like that. They need to be coming out every weekend and giving it everything. And it's unfortunate that didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It is very unfortunate. All right. So we will now move on to our biggest winners of the weekend. Biggest winners. I'll obviously, well, I'm not going to start with them. I'm going to start I'll start off. My biggest winner is Aston Martin. Aston Martin had a very quiet weekend, but they had a good one. Both drivers finished in the points, with Sebastian Vettel finishing 8th, Lance Stroll finishing 10th. They had a really, really great weekend. Yeah, it was nice to see them in the points and having they had a very quiet weekend, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. They double points weekend for them. I think it's finally gotten their championship kick started a little bit, and I hope that form continues for them because they deserve it.
Me too.
Yeah. My, I mean, we've already chatted about Red Bull, but so I'll just say it here again and then move on. Red Bull needs to be one of the biggest winners this weekend.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
They just have to be. Um, I think in that same vein, I think despite Daniel Ricciardo's bad luck, I think we should throw McLaren in there because,
Absolutely.
like I said before, it seems like they're starting to turn a corner. And it'll be interesting to see in 2 weeks' time when we go to Miami and it is a hotter climate, and we saw how they struggled in Bahrain. But I hope that form, that upward trend continues for them.
Me too. And Lando finishing on the podium was a pretty good highlight for them too. So
For sure.
Yeah. All righty. Our last segment of our podcast, we've got some hot takes. And we were chatting about this earlier. We have very similar hot takes, but mine is like Carolina Reaper spicy take. Again, I mentioned I would talk about Lewis. And don't worry, Lewis fans, disclaimer. I'm also going to compare it to something else, so that way you don't have my head, and aren't, running through the streets wanting to see me swing from the gallows. So, Lewis Hamilton. Here's my take. George Russell is a better driver than Lewis Hamilton. I wouldn't even say at the moment. I just think George Russell is a better driver. Now, here's why. You're seeing a lot of Lewis fans claiming, well, it's just the car. It's just the car's really bad. Lewis is great, but it's just the car. Okay. Take a look back in the last couple years. If it's just the car, I think that you can safely say that, yes, I think some of his championship success came from the fact that Mercedes were unstoppable. No one could touch them. Now, look at 2019 and 2020. Literally no other car could come close to Mercedes. And with Valtteri Bottas in the second driver position that he was, it was always going to be Lewis. Before Lewis Hamilton fans come at me, if you can say that about Lewis being a 7-time champion, you can also say that about Michael Schumacher too. He was my childhood hero, personal favorite. I, very, very biased, will always think that Michael Schumacher is the greatest Formula One racer of all time, despite what the records say. But if you can say that about Lewis, you can probably also say that about Michael Schumacher. Because look at the 2002 and 2004 Ferrari seasons. No other team was close. McLaren was second in both those seasons, but they weren't close at all. They were completely dominant all season long. And so, yeah, the fact that Michael won both of those championships was definitely helped by the fact that they had the best car. He didn't have to work as hard to get the championship in those years because they had the best car. And same thing with Lewis. Now, he did have to earn it in, 2014. He didn't, and he was beat in 2016. And 2017 had to battle with Sebastian Vettel, and 2018 had to battle with Sebastian Vettel again. So he's definitely earned his championships, but there have definitely been times where, it's maybe been a little bit the car. And I think this year, most people think, well, yeah, it's the car. They've built a really bad car, and Lewis is not used to it.
Yeah. I think to add a little bit to that, I think the people that are 100% anti it's just the car argument. I'm curious as to what they're thinking right now because, it's not the car. Lewis is a great driver, yada, yada, yada. Well, if it's not the car and Lewis is a great driver,
Explain
then
this weekend.
yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, it's going to be really tough too. I think you can. I think there is an explanation out there, but it's going to be tough to explain, especially considering where George ended up. So I think I think the people that have always said it's not just the car, 100% no argument, no discussion, are probably going to have to look at that a little bit and be like, well, if it's not just the car, then why was he lapped by Max Verstappen? Why was he so outperformed by George Russell?
Why couldn't
all
he pass
weekend?
Pierre Gasly?
Yeah. Yep. And I think, despite the racetrack characteristics, because we saw how Carlos Sainz overtook during the sprint race. So it is possible, I think my take, very similar to Mercedes, is I think there's a new number one in town for Mercedes. I personally think so. I think the team will always operate the way that they have when it comes to Lewis Hamilton being behind the wheel. He has deserved that reputation. He has deserved that right, because he is one of the statistically one of the greatest of all time. I mean, he's tied right there with Lewis Hamilton. I think Mercedes have a new number one in town. And I think, again, for the people that are saying like, oh, we're just hating on Lewis Hamilton. I mean, Michael Schumacher came along and there was someone, Michael Schumacher came and went and there was someone better than him. He was comprehensively outbeat by Nico Rosberg in his second stint in F1 with Mercedes. And I think that is indicative of how things evolve. To give it a basketball analogy, a lot of talk is about Steph Curry and how he's making these insane deep shots and it's ruining the game. But that's the way that the game always goes. There's always the generation after always comes up and beats the generation before. So I think there is a new number one at Mercedes. Mercedes won't admit that. They won't change anything until Lewis retires, and he's earned that right. But Mercedes, they would be they would, I think they're going to lose a little bit if they do not at this point in the season do not prioritize George Russell.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It kind of reminds me of the situation in 2014 with Red Bull when Daniel Ricciardo came in and Sebastian Vettel was struggling. And again, in 2018, when Max Verstappen was starting to rise as the new shining star and Daniel Ricciardo started struggling. So yeah, I would agree. So
yep.
That's my that's my hot take of the weekend.
I think my only other hot take, well, I have a couple, so I have two more. One, this weekend showed that Ferrari is still suffering a little bit of the gremlins from the past. I think the Tifosi have enjoyed a great month and a half. Not to say that time is over. Yeah, I'm not saying that it's over, that the championship's over. That would be way too dramatic to say after one weekend.
Dramatic and traumatic.
Yeah, but I think we saw, I was reminded of a lot of the misfortune that they've suffered over the past 3 years today, where they have a car that can fight and they don't do it,
Mhm.
you know, and they can't.
Hello, darkness, my
And
old friend.
literally. So I think, and it's not that Ferrari are done. It's just the gremlins are still there.
Mhm. Yeah,
My
they
other, sorry,
found that they found the little kink in their armor.
yeah. My other hot take is the sprint race is, as of now, a permanent fixture in Formula One,
Mhm.
and it has earned its right to be that way.
Yeah.
I think there is not nearly enough bad arguments or data to suggest scrapping the idea entirely. And
Oh,
I think you're going to
absolutely.
see this. I think you're going to see this year in and year out, where Formula One had this setup in 2021 of how the sprint races were going to go. And we see it change. That, you know, Friday, the driver who's fastest on Friday still gets pole position. You
Mhm.
know, so they've made a little bit of tweaks for this year. They're going to continue to make tweaks to make it better. That's what
Mhm.
good business people do. And Formula One is a business. So I think, um, sorry, my cats are fighting and they're about to start a world war right now. So I think, God, my cat's distracted me. I don't even know what I was saying. Oh, sprint races. They have earned themselves a place. They have not done anything inherently bad to justify getting rid of them. They will continue to be
Yeah.
tweaked over time, and that's fine.
Yeah.
They've done what their intent was, and
Mhm.
I'm happy with that. And if
Yeah.
it continues to be a permanent fixture in F1, so be it. Make
Yeah.
it happen. I'm down.
Yeah. Me too. Me too. All right. Well, that concludes our episode for this week. So, as always, be sure like and subscribe to our channel. Follow all of our socials. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, all that stuff.
Mhm.
At Formula1_bros for all of them. Be sure to share this with your friends. Follow us on Spotify. Give our Spotify a listen as well. And next week, or not next week, sorry, the next race in 2 weeks, we're on our home soil. We're in America,
Yep.
in Miami. It's going to be really cool. I'm really excited to see how
Yep.
that track has turned out.
Mhm.
They've been posting that the track, the F1 Miami track has like is all over social media. They've been posting all over Instagram. I am unfortunately no longer on Twitter, but on TikTok as well. They've been posting a lot of media, doing a lot of stuff. And I am super, super excited to see that
Yep.
track and see what everything is going to be for that race weekend. Oh gosh, I'm so excited for that.
Yeah, it's going to be a great weekend. So be sure to follow along. Also on our social medias, join in the discussion. We love chatting with folks about
Mm-hmm.
everything Formula One, and that's the best part about Formula One is there are so many facets to this and so many people involved that our thoughts are just our thoughts and they're our opinions. So join in
Yeah.
the discussion. We're always happy to chat about everything. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Oh, and one last cool. Speaking of social media and talking, on TikTok, I'm the admin of the TikTok page. I love responding. So like if like people leave comments on videos, I will most likely respond to them. So
Mhm.
now if our TikTok like blows up and we get like 8 million followers and like thousands of comments on it, that's going to be a little bit more challenging. But
We can only dream at this point.
we can dream at this point. Maybe we'll manifest it to come true. But yes, most likely I like responding to all those comments. I love talking about
Yep.
stuff. Just be sure to keep it classy, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.